Hi, folks. Welcome to the next edition of Serverless Craic with myself, Dave Anderson, author and contributor to Service Edge, and architect at GP.
Hi everyone, Mark McCann, architect at GP and author and contributor to Serverless Edge.
Hey everyone, Michael O'Reilly, architect with GP and contributor to Service Edge. Hello.
It's a Friday, we're all tired. So
Fridays.
we've been doing quite a lot of talking about Wardley Mapping, I think, throughout the book.
Yeah.
And it's a topic that always comes back and people always ask about it. And it is, in fairness, it's a difficult thing to learn. And we've spent many years thinking about it, stumbling around, and then practicing. So we figured we would do a quick series of Wardley Mapping, and I think we're almost 10 years mapping now, give or take.
Yep.
So it's probably worth kind of reflecting on, what we think of the technique and how it goes. Like for me, it's been an absolute game changer. I think the way it introduces you to thinking is second to none. It's far better than any other strategic technique that I've ever come across, and I tend to read quite a lot about things. But I think what we can cover in this episode is how we use it today and some good tips to kind of get started if you're new to it, because it is very daunting when you see maps from someone like Simon Wardley on his Twitter, and it's like, wow, I can't even read that. Never mind draw it. So this question for you guys: do you still value the technique, or do you still thinking that way a lot?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a great way to bring sense to your thoughts and bring sense to some of the things that may be concerning you or troubling you. Once you start thinking about how would you map this out, it starts to bring some clarity to your own thinking. And I think now we've been doing it long enough now where we start to think about how things are interconnected and what the value chain looks like and how one component relates to another. Well, you're almost doing it by instinct now in your head. You're thinking about the components and the value chain and the dependencies and how evolved they are. So I think once you practice this technique, you start to think about things in a different way. And that's the best thing. And I think we'll talk about this, but it really helps facilitate good conversations with everybody. It doesn't matter how senior you are and how familiar you are with mapping. It allows you to have a better, more richer conversation about the thing that you want to discuss, right?
Yeah. I mean, just adding to that, like I find like triggers for when to map or they're quite interesting. Like, so if there's decisions to be made, or how do you prioritize certain things, or how do you decide on what is the next right thing to do, and you need to have conversations across people with multiple disciplines, and can be a really good facilitating technique to facilitate those conversations and to drive towards decisions and drive towards where you think focus should be, or drive towards common understanding. So I can always kind of when I find myself in those situations where those things need to be, those sorts of conversations need to be had, there's always a good opportunity to introduce a mapping exercise, and I do that quite a bit. Also, I kind of feel like when you're in a new area, or you want to kind of immerse yourself in how something hangs together. I'm sure, Dave, you're doing a lot of that at the minute in the new position, where you want to understand a business or a tech stack or just an industry. It can be really handy and very, very quick thing to do, just to come in and assemble a quick map with a bunch of people with different perspectives a particular topic. So yeah, I think in those scenarios it's been really useful.
There's nothing better than putting out a value chain of components and then presenting or collaborating with some of the domain experts and then them pointing out where it's wrong. That's what you want, right? It's like just the dash for action and getting something on a whiteboard or on a a collaborative mirror or something, and then let the experts challenge you and say, hey, that's not over there. Oh, you forgot about this or you forgot about that. It's a great way to get, like you say, get understanding of a new area or a new domain that you may be working into. It's a really an accelerator for understanding for new people coming in, right?
Yeah.
I think, and I mean, absolutely, it really is. Like, but suppose for this, it's probably a step back from it because
Yeah.
I think one thing that's come along since is the Wardley Mapping canvas by Ben Mosior. He's at Hired Thought, and it's a really nice kind of canvas that's got kind of 6 steps to how you map. And remember, the purpose of a map is to figure out who the user is, do a value chain, which you know shows what the user need is and what that depends on, and then plot the evolution of those things from Genesis. It's brand new. This is amazing. It's wonderful. We don't understand it. To custom, we think we can make this thing, but not quite sure. The product, we need this, and it's really important. To commodity, it's the price of doing business. Everyone has one, so every component evolves from left to right. But there's a really nice sequence of steps that Ben has put together, and this is open source. We'll post the links to this. So I figured it might be useful to walk through this because it's the steps before the map make the map successful. So again, there's 6 steps here. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think the purpose bit is always the most fascinating. So what are you trying to achieve? Like Mike said, what's the trigger for this? What purpose do you have? What is the thing that you're trying to accomplish? Do you have a North Star you're trying to align with, or just why is this group of people together? It could be even what is this team doing? What's the purpose of this tech stack? Having that initial conversation is such a rich thing, a rich conversation to have with teams, especially if they haven't been thinking about it and they've just been building and building and building. It's a really fascinating conversation starter with teams.
And this is the first thing, because if a team are deep into something, the first thing we do is lift them back. And really, I mean, without being cheeky, it's like, why do you exist? Why does this project exist? What are you trying to achieve? And you'd be surprised the amount of teams have to stop and think about it and go, good question. Like, I thought it was clear a year ago, but we're in the death march now. We're not quite sure anymore. So just getting a really crisp definition of what the purpose is. That's kind of the first step. And then the second step is scope. What are we trying to map? Now, some people will try and map everything, but you want to try and narrow as much as possible up front, because we talk about there's a temptation to map the world. You want to get that nice and narrow so you can stay focused on something. And sometimes the way of doing that is to decide what we're not going to map. We're not going to worry about like a third party thing or a different team. We're going to focus just on the current scope.
Yeah. And can I just like a quick point I would make on that is before I started using the canvas, I always used to find that maps could get very big and very quick and go off in 60 different directions. So just to shout out to Ben on this, it's been a real kind of lifesaver for keeping the maps fairly focused and fit for the topic. So
I can't remember when this canvas came out. It could have been about 5 years ago, but we started mapping. We didn't have this canvas, and that was the thing that always went wrong. We always just went too wide and confused ourselves.
Yeah, map the world.
Absolutely. I was always guilty of that. And I was like, go deep, and then your maps would have like 50, 60 components, and it's like, and then they would like, let's just take a step back and group these 10 together as one thing. And I think you get better at naming things after a while.
Yeah.
That's
go ahead, Mike.
No, and I was just saying, even getting on to the next two as well.
So that's the first two. Like purpose and scope are the first two, and then the third one's users. Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, and same sort of thing. In relation to this particular kind of topic, who are the main users in the loop? Who's actually part of this flow? And again, it narrows the scope. It narrows the what we're trying to capture. So again, it's a very good exercise sometimes because a lot of people don't know who the users are sometimes.
And this is a pure design. This is a pure design thinking thing, and I always think it's a bit it's blatant your first question for a project to say who's your user, but the fact that it's step 3 and you should probably have one user. Be very clear who that is, even if you give that person a name or a role, be quite specific, Did you be surprised the amount of teams that the answer is we don't really know?
Yeah.
Which uncovers a whole other rich area. So that's the third step. The fourth one is user needs, because once you figure out who the user is, right, what are their needs? And it's not what are their wants, what are their needs? What do they need in the scope? It's usually only like 2 or 3 things.
Yeah. And again, like with the users, it's good to zero in on those core needs, right? There may be adjacent stuff that other users may want, but it's really good to have a conversation about what are the needs of your core users and focus on those, right? Because you'll find there's lots of peripheral stuff that isn't really a factor in what the team's delivering or what you're trying to accomplish.
And I always think when you're going through these first couple of steps is keep it simple. I mean, you might say, well, there's 2 or 3 users, just pick one, get you going. Well, this user has 6 or 7 needs, just pick 2 or 3 just to get you going. And you can always add more later. It's important to move through these, because if you get stuck in one, you'll stay there for a long time.
Yeah.
And then the fifth one is value chain. So this is where it starts getting interesting. With fingers crossed, you've got a single user with a single need. And then that need, it could be like, I don't know, a driver of a car, their need is a car. And then that car depends on something. This is where you can do a value chain. So you've got a user with a need, and then that need that has got dependencies. So that's where the value chain. It's not a value stream, it's a value chain. So like a car may depend on, I don't know, a manufacturer, on, on petrol, whatever else. Like there'll be a couple of things. And again, that's one thing to keep simple.
Yeah, I always find this is definitely it can be difficult sometimes to keep those things fairly abstract, or or not go too deep in it. So I think it is good to try and go as abstract as possible and keep them as high level as possible, even just to start with, just to get something down.
And a thing I always remind people at this point is this is not a formal notation. We're not doing a diagram here or like a model. It's okay to be fairly generic. What you're doing is you're driving conversation. What are the most important needs and dependencies in that value chain? It's not everything. It's okay to leave a couple out.
Aye.
So once you have that value chain of a user, a need, and a couple of dependencies, that's when you then bring that across to the map. And I would usually just put them in the middle of the map. Just drop them all in the product, just to get you started. So you've got them all in a vertical line down your mapping canvas, and that's when you start thinking. You take I usually put the user in product at the top. Then you look at the need. You think, right, is that need in product, or is it custom, Genesis? And you move that from left to right, and then you start moving the different components from left to right. You might work out that one of the dependencies is like commodity, and then one of those custom, and you can just see how that interaction is. And then that's when you start to add in maybe more dependencies, because you have a bit more room in the map.
Yeah, and this is where the conversation really starts to kick into gear, right? And this is where people start to challenge each other's context and each other's thinking about where that component belongs and what's missing from the map. So it makes it very collaborative exercise. And the way I always say is try not to do this on your own. Try to do it with a few people who might be know the domain or know the context, because then you can get into a collaborative challenge where you can challenge the maps and the components on the map and the elements on the map, but you're not challenging Dave or Mike. You're challenging, I think this should go here. What do you think? Oh, that's a bit over to the left, a bit over to the right. Oh, why do you think that? And there'll be some hidden context that's revealed by that conversation. There'll be something that, oh, you forgot about this thing. And you'll be like, oh, okay, now I understand where you're coming from. And that's where the richness and the value really starts to surface of.
And I think, and this is the part, if you're ever facilitating a mapping session, you need to be a good facilitator. You sit and go, I think that's the wrong place. You don't want to say, no, you're wrong. It's in the right place. You want to say, oh, why do you think that? And let the individual explain, well, I think so and so. And there's always richness when a person has something. And usually if it is something that is a blatantly wrong statement, they'll go, oh, no, that doesn't make any sense. But no, thanks for raising the challenge. That's good. So I'd be welcoming for any input. The last thing you want is a sort of an unsafe environment where nobody wants to speak. And then that's the beauty of mapping, because then you get into that conversation, as you say, like.
And that in essence is your first sort of map. That's the basic 101 of mapping, really.
I would just add is, at the end of it, it's always good to try and, to your point, Dave, as a facilitator, you want people, ideally, if it's a really good session, sometimes you can derive some outcomes,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
you would capture those as notes, or next steps, or so ideally you want to get to an outcome,
Yeah. And it doesn't need to be too fancy, you might decide we'll map for an hour, and then if you're facilitating, like 5 minutes or 10 minutes off the hour, or
yeah,
maybe you're just taking a couple of notes. Somebody
sure,
says, oh yeah, we should move that from X to Y. That's an observation. You're not committing to do it, but just list out a few observations.
yeah,
You can think, right, you kind of a couple of good outcomes.
And that's usually
Um,
one where you add a little annotation or note to each of the elements or things that are surfacing as important. And like you said, just have a few notes to say, why have we custom built our own database? That's something we should probably tackle, right? That's maybe
yeah.
there's an evolutionary step. We can move that across to more of a commodity sort of database offering. That's usually that's a good example of something that you might say, hey, we want to evolve this. Now, we're not going to get into it now, but then once you have your initial map, you can talk about how do you want that to evolve? How do you want where do you think this should go to meeting the needs of the users into the future? And then you can have a conversation about, well, what's stopping us from evolving? So in the database example, if you have a database that you're dependent on that's in custom build, you might say, well, we want to evolve that to be much more of a commodity. What's stopping us doing that? So you can then identify, well, maybe we don't have the skill set, maybe we don't have the underlying cloud capabilities or tech stack or whatever. You can start to have notes around what's stopping you from evolving, what are the inertia barriers for that. But I think that's something that you would get to in your next session.
I'd say always just keep it simple. So, a couple of really good links. Again, we talked about Ben Mosior, who's at Hired Thought. He's got a brilliant site called learnwardleymapping.com. Ben created that Wardley Mapping canvas, which is on Creative Commons and open source. Simon's also got a couple of links. There's a site on GitHub called Awesome Wardley Maps. I think it was John Grant created it. It's at list.wardleymaps.com. There's a whole bunch of stuff. And Simon has his own book, his original book on medium.com/Wardley Maps. Again, Simon is brilliant, class, but they're complicated. So if you read one of his articles, you don't understand it, don't beat yourself up. It's great content, but it's very deep. So that's the crack. Well, I think we'll continue this wee series, and we'll get into a few other things as we go. Please keep an eye on the Twitter at Serverless Edge, and on YouTube, and at the blog at theserverlessedge.com. Thanks very much.
Bye, everybody.